Not only do I believe the New York Times will publish an article about UFO crash retrievals, I'm starting to be inclined to believe that some of our senators may have been briefed or tipped off on a UFO crash retrieval special access program that's still running to this day within the United States government. It actually makes tremendous sense that senators would be told that the US government has a crash retrieval program. Because if senators wanted to know more about these mysterious machines that US military personnel have been encountering for decades consistently and are still encountering up until the present day, what could possibly be more fundamental than to be told that, oh, and by the way, we actually have one of these machines? Furthermore, since if there is a crash retrieval program, and therefore that would constitute studying the technology for decades, this would be a window into the real likelihood that this level of technology originates from an adversary as opposed to an unknown source. And finally, I think that the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence would obviously want to know that we actually retrieved one of these machines, because if we indeed have, that means that potentially another country could do the same, and that's profoundly concerning for obvious reasons. To be clear, I have a new source who told me that during the wave of UFO briefings last year, apparently some senators were finally told about a UFO crash retrieval special access program. And this is key to why the New York Times is actually pursuing this story and how they got their leads. What my new source has told me somewhat corroborates with what Lieutenant Tim McMillan recently tweeted. I truly would be interested to hear what other facts there are. I know about congressional staffers being briefed about crash retrieval from both briefers and staffers, and I know what the Senate Select Intelligence Committee has to say about it. I asked the NSA and CIA about the 1961 SNIE, so I know what they officially have to say about it. I spoke with the senior White House advisor for the SecDef's office about it, so I've definitely not based my opinions on feeling when it comes to any of this. Equally, I'm more than willing to be surprised by new info I don't know. McMillan goes on to say, seriously guys, don't set yourself up for heartbreak here. I don't know what else might be out there, but what I know about the briefings isn't going to change the world or anything. Paul Scott Anderson responds, do you mean the briefings specifically regarding crash retrievals or the briefings in general? I mean the briefings that I'm aware of. Of course, there can be others I'm not aware of, but the ones that people have confirmed for me aren't all that impressive. Well, at least according to my source, they may indeed be all that impressive. Joe Murgia quote tweets Anderson, did you see Tim's tweet last night? He said he knows some senators have been briefed on crash retrievals. He then also said that what he knows so far wouldn't change the world, but even just having the subject come up is certainly interesting. Murgia comments, don't believe it. To which McMillan responds, well, I have Dr. Hal Puthoff confirming him and Dr. Eric Davis were there in October of 2019, on the record in writing, so... I'm not sure what McMillan means here, but if he is stating that Eric Davis has briefed Congress, I can tell you with certainty that Dr. Eric Davis believes that the US government does have a UFO crash retrieval program, and I will show you a quote of his that demonstrates that later in this video. And as far as McMillan mentioning Hal Puthoff, well, Puthoff has stated on Coast to Coast AM that UFO crashes and retrievals have validity. He also said at the 2018 IRVA SSC conference in Las Vegas that he couldn't talk about some exotic materials because it's classified.
I'd love to talk about really fancy materials, but they're classified.
The indication is clear to me. I am persuaded that the US government absolutely has materials that do not originate from the hands of man. The only question mark to me is, how far does that go? Does it go beyond mere materials and into the realm of a fully intact craft? It has been relayed that when Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid attempted to get ATIP Special Access Program status, that the ATIP did come into knowledge of a legacy UFO crash retrieval program, and they came to this knowledge through official channels. I think what this all comes down to is that potentially, the world is about to learn that the fabled UFO crash retrieval program is actually real, and that they were able long ago to retrieve a completely intact machine that's not derived from human civilization. Now, if this all sounds wild and crazy to you, allow me to share with you what Luis Elizondo said to Tucker Carlson on May 31st, 2019. And mind you, Luis Elizondo is a very serious individual. He was the head of a UFO program in the Pentagon for the better part of 10 years. And at one point, he was an intelligence aide to the White House.
So let me ask you one last question. Do you believe, based on your decade of serving in the U.S. government on this question, that the U.S. government has in its possession any material from one of these aircrafts?
I do, yes.
Do you think the U.S. government has debris from a UFO in its possession right now?
Unfortunately, Tucker, I really have to be careful of my NDA. I really can't go into a lot of more detail in that.
Okay.
But simply put, yes.
All right.
Here is a quote by Dr. Eric Davis on his assessment of what Luis Elizondo stated regarding his belief that the U.S. government has UFO debris. Dr. Eric Davis has a long history of working for the U.S. government and has maintained a security clearance for a very, very long time. Luis Elizondo's very brief answer to Tucker Carlson's question about whether the U.S. government is in possession of recovered, crashed, and landed UFO technology hardware is 1,000% accurate. My national security NDAs prevent me from adding any further comment on this. On July 17th, Invisible College member Whitley Strieber tweeted the following. Some interesting UFO information will likely emerge soon and from a number of different directions. An unfortunate time for this in many ways, but she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes, as the old song says. She'll be coming around the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming around the mountain.
Shut up.
Man, you're no fun. On July 18th, Grant Cameron states the following regarding the media's chase to uncover a story about a UFO crash retrieval program. Looks like there's a bunch of major media people who are on this thing, and it's almost like they realize they've been had, and it's like a race to get the Pulitzer Prize now, and who's going to get it first. In this interview, Cameron also stated that every person that he spoke with within the New York Times has told him that this story involves crashed saucers. He said that 60 Minutes at one point was pursuing the story, but that it got pulled, and he said that the Australians are pursuing the story because that's where it started. I don't know exactly what he means by that. On July 17th, 2020, George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell were on the Joe Rogan show. At one point, Knapp states, "And I'll tell you, Joe, there's stuff bubbling right under the surface now that is going to rock our world, I think in the next year or so." Later in the interview, George Knapp states, "So supposedly the New York Times is working on that story." Jeremy Corbell interjects, "More than supposedly, they are." Yeah, they are. They've been asking people about this stuff, but I mean, to get that into print, to get it past their editors, that's a hard deal. Hard sell. On July 19th, Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo were on the Coast to Coast AM radio show. And before I tell you a bombshell sentiment that Chris Mellon stated on that show, I first need to set up some context. On June 29th, Chris Mellon published on his public blog a link to an article discussing a UFO crash near Roswell, New Mexico. Here is Chris Mellon's blog where he linked to the article, and this includes an excerpt from said article. Yes, we have UFO crash wreckage. With the New York Times chasing crash saucers and Trump talking on the record, Roswell remains the original sin of the UFO cover-up. On July 19th on Coast to Coast AM, Chris Mellon makes the following sentiment in regards to what the U.S. government may have in regards to UFO material and or even completely intact UFO vehicle. There are a lot of rumors, of course, about the U.S. government and what they may have in that regard. There's nothing I can say about that anyone would believe or take seriously regarding what the answer I provided. Knapp responds, "I'll believe you." Mellon responds, "Well, thank you for the invitation to destroy my meager reputation." That sentiment by Chris Mellon, in my opinion, is anything but trivial. I've gotten to know Chris Mellon over the years, not personally, obviously, but just by observing how he acts, the things he says, what he writes, his decorum, if you will. He does not seem like the kind of person that would have worded sentences like that unless there was something behind it. In June 26, 2016, on Coast to Coast AM, he said that he highly doubts that the Department of Defense or any other government agency is concealing UFO information. Obviously, he's changed his perspective on that because he's received new information. But the point is that it wasn't like back in June 26, 2016, he was chin deep in conspiracy theories. He doesn't have that, he's not prone to that kind of thing. Now, recount that what he's told George Knapp is, there's nothing I could tell you that people would believe or take seriously. And then he further says, thank you for inviting me to compromise my meager reputation. I think the indication is very, very obvious that at least from my interpretation, which could absolutely be wrong, the indication is that he knows more about what the government has regarding UFO material, whether that's pieces of UFO material or how the rumor is unfolding right now that the U.S. government actually has an intact craft. That's all I'm going to say about it. You look at that quote yourself and you make of it what you will. On July 19th, George Knapp asked Luis Elizondo whether or not it was possible that a stovepipe or a silo within the Pentagon could hide something like a reverse engineering UFO program. And Elizondo said, it's possible, but it's very, very unlikely. And the reason is because the way it works within the Department of Defense is that there are all these silos of all these secret programs, but at the very top, there's a clearinghouse, if you will, where people have knowledge of all these programs to ensure that there aren't duplicate programs and also to ensure that they're all lawful. Actually, Elizondo was so high up in the government when he was working for the government at one point that he actually had this position where he would get a bird's eye view of the different silos to ensure that there's no duplicates. So this is why Elizondo thinks it's extremely unlikely that a program like this would exist. Now, bear in mind that Chris Mellon also had an oversight position within the Department of Defense when he was in the government. He had all the secrets. And yet, neither Mellon nor Elizondo were ever aware of any program that retrieved crashed UFOs and attempted to back engineer them. So the implication by what Elizondo stated is that if there is such a program, that it's rogue and that it's unlawful. In fact, the following is what Elizondo had to say regarding those that would be behind such a rogue special access program.
I think whoever did that would have to really worry right now that they could be in jeopardy of going to jail because there are regulatory and oversight requirements. The Inspector General IG and OGC Office and General Counsel specifically have jobs to make sure that people don't run rogue operations, and they don't run operations, if you will, without somebody in the chain of command being aware.
Now let's circle back. Do I think there will be a New York Times article covering the subject of UFO crash retrieval programs somewhere within the U.S. government? The answer is yes. And the reason is best explained through the following tweet.
The news source that publishes a crash retrieval article first will have an eternal legacy if it ultimately proves true. And if it's ultimately wrong, the negative impact will be minimal. The New York Times would be nuts not to take that gamble if they've found compelling sources. Nuts.
Here's what Politico journalist Brian Bender had to say when he was asked whether or not he sold on the Wilson Davis documents, as well as the backstory involving Miller, Greer, and Mitchell.
Intrigued for sure, but sold? There would have to be more corroboration, including on-the-record claims of ownership, to make it more than just another unsubstantiated claim. But I have not looked into it deeply. Maybe I'm naive. I just don't see how that gets covered up.
Now, after this entire presentation, do I believe that there is a UFO crash retrieval program that is in the past retrieved an entirely intact non-human machine and has for many decades and is still currently attempting to back engineer it? The answer to that question is, I don't know. I go back and forth to some extent. I have cognitive dissonance. I'll just say no. I'll say I don't believe it. And I don't necessarily have a solid reason, but of course the evidence is pretty thin as it stands. There's a lot of smoke. Don't get me wrong. There is a ton of smoke, but there's nothing wholly tangible. So Can there be a lot of smoke without fire? I would say yes. But I will tell you, I think one of the reasons that I'm reluctant to believe, and it's an emotional reason, it's a visceral reason, and not necessarily an intellectual reason. It's hard for me to wrap my head around the proposition that my fellow human beings and my fellow Americans would sit on top of a astounding discovery like this, not for a day, not for a year, not for the duration of the Cold War, but like 70 plus years, all the while having the common sense to recognize that making such a discovery like this public would be profoundly inspiring for mankind. Why would you hold that back? What could possibly be within the depths of your heart to do that? Think about how the scientific and engineering community would respond, the journalistic community, philosophers, intellectuals, people that are curious, people that are bored with life and maybe want something exciting to experience. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. There is so much more upside than downside by allowing people to have more information on the nature of their reality. And wouldn't their conception of the nature of their reality be entirely different if they were provided with the knowledge that a alien machine has been recovered decades ago? I think the answer is a resounding yes. Now, such a revelation may challenge religions. It may challenge the status quo of our institutions. But isn't that progress? Isn't that progressive? I am astounded that there are people potentially, because like I said, I didn't say I even believe it, but potentially there are Americans who have made the decision to stagnate not only their country, but the world. I mean, it's so outrageous that there are not words within the confines of the English dictionary that could ever possibly get even a modicum close to expressing the vileness of this, if it's true. Even though I think covering something like this up is an affront to humankind, and the upside of disclosure is light years beyond the downside, I would still promote amnesty for those that have broken laws and regulations, allowing them to implement this operation without the proper oversight of the Department of Defense. And the reason I have this sentiment is simply because I want as much knowledge and understanding of what's going on in our world. And I don't want to give these people even a tiny, minute motivation to keep lying and keep withholding information. We have been under this stupid cover-up for decades. And when it ends, baby, I want it to end. I have 7 words that I want you to internalize into the depths of your soul. The house of cards will fall, baby. Please do not forget to subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. Link is in the description below. And of course, I sell masks so you don't get the cooties. Or you could even become a patron, or even a YouTube member by clicking the Join Now button below. Or you could just slap a like on this bad boy, and I will appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.